When did single payer come into Canada?
Pardon?
When did you get single payer in Canada?
When did
it come into play in
Canada? 1962, I think. Brought in by the NDP, a fellow from the DFL equivalent in Canada from Saskatchewan, actually. Tommy Douglas, I think his name was. And he was voted the most important motivational person of the century in Canada. Single most important person, because Canadians value that. It allows you flexibility. I went from Toronto to Montreal to Vancouver to British Columbia to Alberta, all seamlessly, a simple phone call, I was covered, no matter what happened. I was in a car accident, I was paralyzed, I had brain damage. You talked about this, I was in a wheelchair for 3 months. Covered. My mother passed away. She had cancer. The government paid to have a hospital bed put in her living room so she could rest peacefully and pass away peacefully at home, surrounded by her friends, without putting everybody into the poorhouse to look after her.
I'm sorry.
So no, that's.
Is there an estimate of or actually maybe, I don't know if the chamber would, I've always been curious if there's an estimate of what the healthcare cost is for business. Because as an operating expense, it's got to be, I'm thinking, high single digits.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure it depends on your business and the mix of your workers, because unfortunately, especially in small business, it's the health history of the workers that decides your premiums, which is really unfair, but it's the way it's set up here.
That's the astounding part.
Healthcare in total in Minnesota is a $35 billion enterprise. And if you figure at least, 3/4 of that is employment-based insurance, it kind of depends on how you split it too with your employees. Some employers are very generous in picking up the premium, and some contribute almost nothing. The people who are most disadvantaged in the marketplace right now are people who are dependent. Oftentimes they're individuals who have their own business, going into the individual policy market. Because it's all, if they're young and they're healthy, they'll do well, but if they've ever had a problem, they're going to pay very, very high rates.
Could you talk about a little bit more the phenomenon of Minneapolis being all DFL, the state, the outstate, and the Republicans taking on the city or whatever, and especially as it relates to what I call the money grab, the taking of NRP funds?
Well, and I don't want to predict the future. I'm just saying that's the way it was with the previous Republican leadership. Now, they have totally changed over. Their A-team, Marty Seifert, Steve Svagum, Representative Coles, who ran for governor, Laura Broad. Their A-team have all chosen not to run again. Randy Dammer ran for Congress and didn't. And so it's a whole different generation, and Tom Emmer. They've got a whole new group of leaders, and they may have a different focus than the group that did 4 years ago, who may have brought other baggage. And so I can't say for sure that's going to happen, but when I was asked what happened the last time, that was a major focus. And I don't think it was, in part it was because they don't have any members in Minneapolis, but I don't think that was the major thing. I think whenever you're the biggest, you're a target. And there's this myth that we are all wildly rich and successful, and we have, our houses cost twice as much as houses in greater Minnesota, so we must all be doing well, and our incomes are often a little bit higher, and they don't think about the increased cost of living in an urban area and what that means. And so it's about those kind of numbers. They also don't think oftentimes about, as a central city, you step up when others don't. Our probation officer here could tell us how we are disproportionately burdened with people who have had problems and done things in other parts of the state of Minnesota. And when they're released, rather than going to the small town where they're labeled and known by everyone, and shunned perhaps, they rent an apartment in Minneapolis somewhere. If you have a child with severe health issues or severe disabilities, your opportunities are so much less in some parts of Minnesota in terms of access to that specialized health care, that those families oftentimes tend to make a decision to move to Rochester or to Minneapolis and St. Paul so that they can get access to those medical experts and the therapies and the specialized programs. And so, and we have costs that they don't have to bear. I mean, even my suburban counterparts are surprised that when I say we have 50% more roads than you do, and they're like, well, yeah, you got a lot of neighborhoods that are compact, and so you should have less. It's like, no, we have alleys. And they're like, oh, I didn't think about that. You know, I mean, it's just some things are a factor of history. And so, and when you look at need, we have more disproportionately more people at the lower income spectrum. We have more people who have, if you were wheelchair bound, we have so much more accessible housing. I mean, if I had to be in a wheelchair, I want to live downtown in a condo connected to a skyway. You know, especially in a winter like this, I mean, your options are incredibly limited. If you don't want to drive a car, or it's not safe for you to drive a car, you know, we've got better transit in the metro than you're going to have elsewhere. And so, I mean, they just don't think about what the cost of that kind of infrastructure is. And because the Star Tribune tends to cover our challenges and maybe not always our successes, and it is the statewide paper, I think, you know, sometimes they're fed a little fodder of issues to raise. On the NRP issue, I think that was my sense is that that was a sudden response to a lot of taxpayers being frustrated with their property tax increases, and it wasn't the finest moment in budget analysis or proposal development. And as a result, I think it will continue to be rethought through. I don't think it has legs in the legislature amongst the Minneapolis delegation, although we haven't met on it yet formally as a group. There's questions about even whether it's legal under the statutes that created NRP. And I think it didn't take into account, for example, the lottery system that happened long ago. I was the first NRP chair of Wyndham Park. And when we had the first lotteries of the 81 neighborhoods, year after year, none of the neighborhoods north of downtown were selected. Luck of the draw didn't work for this side of town. And so there actually was, I'm told, a special law passed through the legislature that said if no one from this side of town, north, northeast, southeast, got selected, they had to have a special lottery for this side. So this side of town could get going. Well, that meant that neighborhoods and others south of downtown, some of them had 2 to 3 more years to do their plan and implement it. Some of them had richer resources to activate their plan earlier. Some of them had nonprofit development corporations that they had actually formed and successfully launched when they were housing redevelopment areas. They had staff on. We had neighborhoods that hadn't even formed. I mean, I remember we hired John Lindstrom from the Wade Park neighborhood, and we went out each neighborhood in Northeast that didn't have a neighborhood group and said, you have to get one going. And we had model bylaws, and we had, you know, what it would mean, because that was the way the city was going. And so we just didn't have the infrastructure equalized across the state. The other thing is I don't think they thought about the majority of NRP money goes to housing improvements. Right now, so many people, because of declining values, are underwater in their mortgages. There is no access to the private market for home improvement loans to replace the roof that's leaking from the ice dams, to upgrade the furnace, to do the just basic maintenance that's part of owning an older building. And I don't think, I mean, all those discussion points, if it had been a normal process in City Hall with, you know, hearings and staff work and things like that, all that would have bubbled up quickly. But it was done in just a matter of days, and I'm hoping that I'm pretty confident people are rethinking this and re-examining it. So I don't know if it's going to come to us or not. I'm not very supportive. I'm supportive of the cities having a tough financial situation. I think there's some other options available, but that's a dialogue we haven't started yet.
Thanks, Sue. Amy?
I'm sure you don't really appreciate the single issue people, but I'll just throw out my issue and you can tell me what you think about it.
I appreciate everybody's issue. And actually, the single issue people are the biggest resources oftentimes to us because they have passionately studied it and know it, and they can actually offer you some real insights that someone who's on the surface doesn't. So,
With that introduction.
With that introduction, yeah.
what do you
You hear a lot about green jobs, but I'm wondering about if there's any movement in the legislature for conservation jobs, if there would be a bottle bill, if we would look at reducing our waste stream, if we would look at organics out of the waste stream, if there's any movement legislatively to do that kind of social engineering that would.
There's been bills introduced on those sorts of things. They haven't gotten a lot of traction, quite honestly. And it's for a variety of different reasons, depending on each particular one. I think there's a lot of us who have a really strong environmental ethic, but quite honestly, it's not geographically balanced. And so it isn't. So what we're interested in isn't necessarily what northern Minnesota small towns are interested in. They think, quite honestly, we're wasteful. They have big trucks going down our alleys picking up our recycles when they have to drive them into a centralized spot on their way to drop off, get their groceries. And so, I mean, there's different ways of doing it. And I think they've always, this is a good example where we've looked to local governments to be the incubators and the testers and the piloters of good ideas, and we've supported them. The SCORE money, which was created by Commissioner Peter McLaughlin, when he was a legislator, has provided local money for recycling efforts and locally tailored programs. Minneapolis, and Susan is here, has been a leader in trying to start to pilot collecting organics and those sorts of things. The pilot effort that you've got collecting plastics is. And so I think we're going to have to keep learning from those local experiments and then keep providing general dollars, because one size doesn't fit all. And too often when we do state policy, you end up with a solution that doesn't work. For example, if most of Minnesota is used to driving their recyclables themselves to a central collection site, we know that if we had that in Minneapolis, it probably wouldn't be as effective as curbside picking up. And so I think we're going to keep doing that. I tend to like giving general resources and revenues to support those sort of efforts, and then let the locals be accountable for outcomes, but then have them put their creativity to figure out what works best. And I think that we often follow the public. You know, for example, Representative John Lesh from St. Paul has had a bill banning plastic bags for shopping. And you know, I think as people see more and more people using reusable bags, then they think, well, why do we ban it? Because we know there's some people who really need and use that for cabinet or something or other. And I mean, so it's you know, can we minimize the use? I've been a leader in the state house with a couple of my peers trying to reduce our own practices in the legislature. I mean, radical. I still have not been successful. Because of the Senate, primarily. But I can't wait to get us from legal size paper to 8.5 by 11. It drives me nuts when I get something that uses this much of the paper and it's on legal size. The courts changed over 20 years ago. But, you know, in a tradition-bound organization.
Too much change.
You got it.
Susan? Or I'm sorry.
Well, just a real fast comment. There's a magazine called Dwell. Has anybody heard of it?
Yeah.
Their January-February issue is entirely dedicated to recycling and reuse. I'm getting a couple of copies mailed to your Minneapolis or Minnesota Pollution Control Agency so people can look at it. But if you get an opportunity, it's an excellent issue.
Susan?
Just before we move on, I want to say there is a local issue that's emerging, and I don't have much of the details on it yet, and that is we're going to be confronted with a proposal from Hennepin County to expand their garbage burning capacity, and that's going to bring a whole discussion of how much we're doing on recyclables versus putting into that waste stream.